Canadians were victims of identity theft last year. With more on the identity theft laws, I'm joined by David Fraser. He's a lawyer who specializes in privacy issues. Are they going to have difficulty proving intent, do you think? What about all the legal challenges facing this legislation?
Well, I think there's always a challenge in proving intent, but we have a number of offenses in our criminal code where intent is an important portion of proving the charge. And you can do that by looking at the totality of the circumstances. You don't necessarily have to look directly into the head of the accused.
Okay, so then, well, do you think this method is going to be effective?
Well, I think this method, at least from what I've heard about the legislation, I haven't seen the text of it yet, fills a gap that we have. It's currently against the law to commit fraud. It's against the law to impersonate somebody. But there is a significant gap in that it's not an offense to do all the things that are preparatory to it. So I think it gives law enforcement an additional tool to deal with this rapidly growing offense.
How big a problem is it, and how fast is it growing?
Well, I think that the statistics are a little bit challenging to make out. At least in the United States, the statistics out of there talk about it being one of the fastest growing crimes. We've seen reports from phone busters in Canada of thousands of victims in Canada in the run of a year, but there are probably even more who don't report it, or there isn't mandatory reporting from the banks or the credit bureaus, for example, who might be the first ones to hear about it.
All right, so have you got any other alternative ideas of how we should be dealing with this?
Well, I think that there are a number of approaches that can be taken, and I think this piece of legislation, depending on exactly how it works, is probably a good portion of it. But there's also issues with respect to securing that information in the very first place. We have privacy laws in Canada that require every business that deals with personal information to put in place adequate security, and that's one of the places where that information often gets into the hands of identity thieves. Another part of it might be simply to make it a little bit more challenging in order for credit grantors to extend credit to individuals. For example, to require the individual to prove they are who they say they are before opening a bank account, before opening a credit account, before buying that large order of furniture on layaway at the store.
It does seem to be difficult, though. I mean, a lot of stores that you go to, they ask you for information, like what's your address, what's your postal code, for their marketing reasons. But, I mean, what do consumers need to know about protecting themselves, particularly when it's not necessarily the consumers that do anything wrong? It could be the banks or the government, or information gets out from all kinds of places.
Well, certainly we're seeing more and more reports of leaks of personal information from large businesses, small businesses, and government. And so in many cases, the individual consumer doesn't have a whole lot of control over how that information is going to be used. But they do in many cases have a choice about whether they're going to provide that information in the first place. That if you don't think it's necessary for an organization to have your name and address, if you think they're just going to be using it for marketing purposes, a consumer is free to say no, and I simply don't want to provide that information. But consumers also need to be vigilant to make sure that their information isn't being misused. That they can check their bank statements, they can check their credit reports, they can do those sorts of things. If they notice that, for example, they're not receiving mail for a period of time, it may mean that somebody has been dipping into their mailbox and has been taking their information that way, and then they can act.
And shred everything? Is that another good piece of advice before you put it in the recycling bin?
Every bit of information that goes into the garbage can should be shredded. The price of shredders is so inexpensive these days that there's no reason why not to. Every single bank statement, every single phone bill, all those things, all the receipts you accumulate in your pocket in the run of a day, everything like that should go through a shredder and then into the recycling bin.
I think I've just solved a Christmas present problem. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And 2 computer disks containing the personal information of about half the British population have been lost. But Prime Minister Gordon Brown says Britons have nothing to worry about.
I profoundly regret and apologise for the inconvenience and worries that have been caused to millions of families who receive child benefit.
The disks are password protected, but the information on them is not encrypted. The mistake has left millions of people exposed to identity theft and bank fraud. The computer disks disappeared while being sent from one government department to another. They contain names, addresses, birth dates, national insurance numbers, and even some banking details for about 25 million people.